All right. Vamos. Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Shavis, Perek Beis, Halacha Daled, and Halacha Hey. We're learning today Daf Yud Beis. We left off on Daf Yud Beis, Amid Aleph, Mamish, on the top of the Amid. We started yesterday learning a Braisa at the end of Daf Yud Aleph Amid Beis that says that Hanoiteya, right, that when you plant a tree 30 days before Rosh Hashanah, also Lo Shana Tamima. Now, I want to add something extremely important, Benegea, what we learned versus halacha lamaisa. And what we learned yesterday, and we interpreted the Gemara properly according to Rabbi Meir. We interpreted the Braisa correctly according to Rabbi Meir. Number one, the Braisa follows the opinion that it takes 30 days for a tree to take root. As we learned yesterday in the Mishnah, there's really a three-way machloikas tanoim. But the Braisa follows the 30-day. And then there's something else, that since the beginning of the counting of the years of Orla is Echad B'Tishrei, according to Rabbi Meir, even only one day of the year is considered a full year. So if you planted it 30 days before Rosh Hashanah, it took root, because taking root is 30 days. And now that it took root before Rosh Hashanah, so then the Nur Echad B'Tishrei is already the beginning of the second year, as we said yesterday. I want to tell you like this, that there are two other ways. The rule will be the same, but there are two other opinions that are actually brought down all the way halacha l'maisa. On one hand, a leniency. On one hand, the stringency. The leniency is that we're going to follow in halacha the shita of Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon that for a tree to take root, you only need to have 2 weeks. But for you to say that since the tree took root before Rosh Hashanah, whenever the new Rosh Hashanah comes, you can already begin year number 2 for the count of Orla, according to halacha, you have to have 30 days Shloishim Yoim Bashana, only then will you say is Chashav Shana, not like Rabbi Meir that even only Yoim Echad Bashana is Chashav Shana. Halacha l'maisa, that means that if you plant a tree on the 15th of Av, then you gave yourself 2 weeks and a month, and now when the Echad B'Tishrei comes, you are beginning year number 2. If you plant a tree Tez Zayin B'Av, right? Tezayin Menachemov. So then, guys, don't forget that Elul today only has 30 days. That's why I'm saying Tezayin. So then you don't have 2 weeks and 30 days. You have 2 weeks and 29 days. Then you will not say that Echad B'Tishrei is the beginning of year number 2. Anyways, coming back to the Braisa, the Marafulda says that the Braisa is Rabbi Meir. So let's go back to what we said yesterday, because according to the Braisa, it's accurate. Again, on one hand, the Braisa is more machmir because it holds that you need to have, like the Tanakama of our Mishnah, 30 days for a tree to take root. But once the tree took root, even only a few moments before Rosh Hashanah, that's the meaning of Yom Echad. Yom Echad never means 24 hours. It means as long as the tree was halachically planted, which means it took root before Rosh Hashanah, so Echad B'Tishrei begins this year number 2. So we left off in that part of the Braisa. Now, based on that, you would think, okay, so if I planted it on the 30 days before Rosh Hashanah, so now Echad B'Tishrei is year number 2, then you have year number 3, and once year number 3 ends, when does the year end? Echad B'Tishrei, l'chayra, you left the status of Arla. Says this Braisa, no, doesn't work that way. That for the tree to leave the status of Arla, and subsequently in the next year in the Holy Land, for the tree to leave the status of Revoi, you have to wait until Tu B'Shvat. That's going to be what we're going to learn in the Braisa. And now we'll have a Machlokes Amoraim, and both of these opinions are brought down in Halacha L'Mais. And that is, so we just said a Chumrah, that the year doesn't end by Echad B'Tishrei. The year ends only by Tu B'Shvat. So one opinion holds, when do you say you have to wait until Tu B'Shvat? Only in the case where you planted the tree close to Rosh Hashanah, like in the case of the Braisa, 30 days before Rosh Hashanah. So since year number 1 was really a non-year, it was a day, So since you don't have a full 3 years, that's why for you to end the 3 years, you have to wait until Tu B'Shvat. But if you planted the tree in a way where by Echad B'Tishrei, you already have a full 3 years, then you won't have to wait until Tu B'Shvat for you to have these fruits leaving the Torah of Orla. That's a leniency. The other Ramoida holds that no, that regardless when you planted the tree, as we'll explain the reason why, yes, for the beginning of the count, Echad B'Tishrei is Rosh Hashanah, but for the end of the count, it has to be Dafka Tu B'Shvat, based on a Mishnah that we learned above, as we'll quote it soon. Then again, the definition of Netiyos and Elon, we're going to get back to that. We will learn it inside. So that's going to be that machlokes is between.
So for Arla, you would need 3 and whatever.
Always 3 and whatever. Always. And according to the other Amoida, one or the
3
other.
years and 5 months, or 5.5 months, something like that.
Well, don't say 3 years. Well, okay, let's review it inside. Now, this is the machlokes between Abba Bar Mamol and Abzeira, as we'll see. That's going to be the sugya until halacha hey. Halacha hey will begin the following, guys. Now we have to halt up. Now we are touching not only dinei shvi'is, but we're going to start touching the rules of maisres. So as we learned so many times, and let's chazir, that once we started to count in year 2503 from the creation, the count of Shemitah. The reason why we count the years is not only to establish what year is Shemitah and subsequently what year is Yovel, but it's also Negeya concerning Ma'aser Sheni, Ma'aser Ani, that Truma Gedoyla always has to be taken, Ma'aser Rishon has to always be taken, Trumas Ma'aser always has to be taken. But now, what happens after you took Ma'aser Rishon? First, second year, fourth and fifth year, Ma'aser Sheni, third and sixth year, Ma'aser Ani. Okay, and there's the count of Shvi'is. Why am I mentioning that? Because whenever you're going to plant a product towards the end of the year, when I say the year, I'm referring to the year beginning in Echad B'Tishrei, what we are the most familiar with, what we practice the most, that one of the 4 Rosh Hashanim, one of the 5 Rosh Hashanim is Echad B'Tishrei. So here we go. What happens if I plant any product towards the end of the year, but it only is ready full in the new year? So what year does it belong to? Both Benegeya to Ma'aser Sheni, Ma'aser Ani, and Benegeya to Shvi'is. Now, Shvi'is, I know, just to repeat, even though the Torah says you may not harvest Peder Shvi'is, it doesn't mean you may not harvest it at all. It only means you may not harvest it Kidarkoi in its usual manner when you gather a lot for you to eat, for you to sell, when you take possession of it. On Shvi'is, you can harvest it Shaloi Kidarkoi for yourself to eat, make no mistake. But all of the produce of Shvi'is, has Kedushas Shvi'is. There is a sanctity, and that finds its expression concerning the Hilchos of beer that we never spoke out yet when we began this Masechta, concerning the restrictions of Schoida with Peder Shvi'is and others. So if I want to know whether a product has Kedushas Shvi'is, again, the question will be, how do you count its year? From when you planted it, from what part? So there is a general rule that divides all of plants into 3 categories, and the Mishnah will already begin with the exception. So let me just share over here the general rule. The general rule is like this. When it comes, guys, remember, when it comes to grains and 2 fruits, the only 2 fruits of Tirosh v'Yitzar, when it comes to grains, the 5 grains, wheat, barley, oats, rye, spelt, and olives and grapes, the decisive part that is needed to know what year it belongs to is when it reached the 3rd of its maturity. Even though we were learning now, Benegeya, a tree, it's about when it took root. That's concerning the tree. We were speaking about the Isser of planting a tree, of causing a tree to be planted on Shemitah. I know that. When we were speaking about planting a tree for Arla, we're looking first at the tree. For the tree is when it takes fruit. But the fruits of a tree, olives and grapes, and all the grains, these 2, it is when it reached a 3rd of its maturity. All the other fruits is chanata. The word chanata is when it emerges. The word chanata can be called when it buds. The word chanata can mean when it blossoms. The chanata is what happens, lebei Shammai echad, and lebei Hillel tu b'shvat. But that's called chanata. By all vegetables, it goes basar lekita. It has to do with when did you harvest the vegetable. Not when you planted it, not when it took root, not when it reached the 3rd, not when it emerged, when you harvested it. That you have to remember. So Nachmal, grains, olives, and grapes, a 3rd of maturity. Fruits, chanata, budding, vegetables, likita. Now the Mishnah will begin with exceptions. We'll see rice and millet and other exceptions that when it took root, but
Isn't it esrog an exception also?
we'll get to all of it. That's the beginning of Kedushin, right? When we had the esrog, I think the seven. Anyways, correct. So we have exceptions. These are the rules. And finally, bederach agav, we're going to introduce svichim, and I want to speak about it right now. A tree is something that you plant once, and it gives you residual fruit, like the gabbai in insurance. So what I'm saying now, dafke does not apply to anything that's residual. That which is not residual, vegetables, you have to plant. You plant a tomato. Once you pick the tomato, you want another tomato, you have to plant again. What happens if it grows on its own on Shvi'is? I'm not talking about fruits that you, like we mentioned, you can pick it, shaloi kedarko, and eat it as long as it's before the zman of bir, v'chulei v'chulei. Any product that you need to plant every time for you to have that product, midoi raisa, if it grew on its own, you can eat it. Why not? That's called svichim, an aftergrowth, something that, so to say, grew by nature, grew without human planting. The Chachamim made a gzeda that you are not allowed.
Are we talking in any year? 6, 7, or 8?
Shemitah.
Oh, in the 7th year.
The Chachamim said that svichim that grows on the year of Shvi'is may not be eaten. Why? Because they're going to say that you're, God forbid, a person is going to plant it, which you're not allowed to do, and they're going to claim it grew on its own. So just remember that there's an isur d'Rabbanan on svichim, and remember this obviously does not go to fruits, because the whole definition of svichim is something that needs to be planted for it to grow. I know a fruit needs to be planted, but you don't need to plant it on that year. Okay, I think that's enough for the introduction, and let's dive right inside. So again, our Brayso is following Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir holds mitzad echad shloishim yoim is needed for something for a tree to take root. Number 2, yoim echad bashana is already chashuv shana concerning the beginning of the counting of the early years. So it's shayach that you planted something only 30 days before Rosh Hashanah, and you are already in year number 2, 31 days later. And therefore, you would think that when does Arla end? After 2 years and 30 days. That will be the case. Danny was counting the months. You would think, Zok de Braisa Sedish Tazoy. Aval Amru, however, top of Daf Yud Beis, I think you have the wrong Masechta. Aval Amru, you can share with your brother. Peides Nitiyazu. But when it comes to Peides, when it comes to you want to know when the Arla is not here anymore. Asurim ad chamish ase b'shvat. Aha. Now there's a key word over here. The key words is peiros netiya zu. Why did the Brayso say the word zu? You see that? That already lends you to think, as we'll see in a moment, according to one Amoira, that if you only have 2 years and 30 days, then you got to wait until Tu B'Shvat. Those words would fit better. Now, when would you not need to wait until Tu B'Shvat? When the year has at least 3 full years since it was planted, like a birthday. I'll repeat that again when we get there. Now, before we go on, where do we get that from? The Torah says 3 years. Where do we get this inconsistency? Because if you're telling me that Echad B'Tishrei is when the year changes, and the Torah says that Ubashana Haravis, you can not to avoid. Ubashana Chamishis, you can eat it. So the Gemara says, Umatam in Yerushalmi, Matam always means what's the source? So if you want to take a look on the Torah Oira Shalom, I want to read from Parshas Kedoshim, Vayikra Yutes, Pasuk Chav Gimel and Pasuk Chav Dal. Pasuk Chav Gimel reads, V'chisa vayola aretz, unatatem kol eitzmachol, va'araltem orlosoyes piryoi. So the Torah says, Shaloi shonim yolachem arelim, lo yeyachel. End of verse. The next Pasuk begins, Bashana Haravi'is, and the emphasis will be from the Vav Hamachaber, Bashana Haravi'is here, called Piryoy Kodesh Ilulam Lashem. Kodesh means not Kodesh like Arla, that you cannot eat it at all, and by parenthetically, this is not the only time that the Torah uses the words Kedusha for something that you may not eat. Let me just explain to you, why do we use the word Kedusha for something that you may not eat? Because everything has godliness in it. And there are many things that I cannot partake of because I am not on that level. And when it comes to the fourth year, I can become on that level if I'm praising God, which means if I go to Yerushalmi. But anyways, bottom line. So here, let me just tell you what the Gemara says by heart. If you're looking at the psukim, the Vav HaMachaber allows the word Ubashana to go both on Pasuk Chav Gimel and on Pasuk Chav Dalet. For the people that look down at all of the Rebbe Shatoiras, this is a Rebbe Shatoira. So the way you read it is like this: that Shalosh Shanim Yilchem Areilam Lo Ye'achel. For 3 years you can't eat it. Ubashana Haraviyas, nor on the fourth year. And then you read the pasuk again, and on the fourth year you could eat it in Yerushalayim. It's the moment you read the words Ubashana both above and below, then the Torah is being merames that even in the fourth year you can't eat it. But on the fourth year, you could eat it. Tu b'shvat. Let's read it inside. So Rabbi Yasa b'shem Rabbi Yochanan, Ubashana, as we just quoted. And the Gemara elaborates, so ma'at shema mino. Okay, what do you see from the words Ubashana? Amar Rab Ze'ed, I'll tell you. The Vav HaMachaber will tell you that you have to read the word Ubashana on both psukim. Ubashan. Beautiful. And the Gemara is bekitz in Makatzer. And then you read again, Ubashana Haraviyas, Yelachem kol piriyoi kodesh ulol mashem. Okay. So now, as we mentioned, the Braisa says, Avol Amru.
Rabbi, how do we get to Tu B'Shvat Dafka?
Wait. I'm going to answer you in a moment. It's going to be clear in a moment. Before we get, I want to go on the Seder of the Gemara because the Gemara is going to address it. That when it says, Peiros Nitiya Zu, right? These are the words we have on top of the Amid. That's the words of the Braisa. If the Braisa is telling you that you always end the third year on Tu B'Shvat, so the Braisa should have says, Avol Amru, that, don't say Zu, that Peiros Nitiyos or Peiros Ilonos, Asuram Ad Chamisha. Zu is going to the case that we learned in the Reisha. The case in the Reisha is that even if you only planted it 30 days before Rosh Hashanah, Kishitas Rabbi Meir, 30 days to take root, Yom Echad Bashana Chashav Shana concerning the count, here is where you have to wait until Tu B'Shvat. And indeed, Amar Rabbi Ba, which is really Rab Abba, Amar Rabbi Ba Bar Mamel, in front of Rab Ze'era, that Nirem Hadvarim, from the word Zu, it looks like that's only when do you have to wait later in the fourth year. Let me tell you what I mean by waiting later. I just want to touch Tu B'Shvat, to touch it better. That if, guys, it's a tree, that if the fruit, we just mentioned in our introduction that by fruits, with exceptions, forget about the exceptions, it's after Chanata. What happens if I have an apple tree and it blossomed in the beginning of Kislev, if it were to happen? I know it's not usual. So even though it's the fourth year, since it blossomed before Tu B'Shvat, so therefore I'm going to say, it's Arla. That's what we're saying. If it blossomed after Tu B'Shvat, which by the way is going to be 90% or more, then it's already not Arla anymore. So when do we say that even in the fourth year, if the Chanata was before Tu B'Shvat, it's still Arla? That's only because you don't have a full 3 years, which would be the case of the Braisa. Like we said. So really, in the case of the Braisa is an extreme. You only have 2 years and 30 days. But I'm not saying that Rab Abba is not, Rabba Bar Mamel is not only saying it when it's 2 years and 30 days. He's saying this if you don't have a full 3 years. If you planted the tree in a way that you don't have a full 3 years, let me tell you, you know where you're going to have a full 3 years? I'll give you the case of the Braisa. Listen to this. What happens if I planted it on the second day of Elul? I'll tell you better now with the calendar. If I planted it, Rosh Chodesh Elul, Aleph Elul. I know today El has 2 days Rosh Chodesh, but Aleph Elul to the end of Elul is only 29 days. Let's go. So what does Rav Meir hold? Since you need 30 days for it to take root, so when do you go into the second year? Not this Rosh Hashanah, next Rosh Hashanah, which means that Aleph Elul, you already have a full 3 years. Once you already have a full 3 years, then Echad B'Tishrei is already out of the third year. And even if the tree blossomed right at Beis Tishrei, or even Echad B'Tishrei, you're like I said, in the middle of a Kislev, now it's not Arla. That's what Rabbi Mamel is saying. In other words, it's either or. If you have a full 3 years, that's the pshat on the pasuk. The Torah did, it's so good because then you can read the Ein Mikri Yitzim Deipshut, right? 3 years at Elim, and on the fourth it's out of that. And by the way, the same thing is on the Revoi. But if you don't have a real 3 years, you want to use a halachic 3 years, you have to wait until Tu B'Shvat. Oh, that's what he's saying. The case that he gave is the case that I just said. You planted it only 29 days before Rosh Hashanah. So it means Rosh Hashanah of the 4th year, you have a full 3 years plus 29 days. You have already more than 3 years. Then Eisa Chamei, come and see, Shana Shalema Al Yishaloi. Then the Echad B'Tishrei will complete the 3rd year, and you don't have to wait until Tu B'Shvat.
If you planted it 29 days before, when was the Chanata? You're saying then it would be
That's
when?
what I'm saying. Okay,
on Rosh
Hashanah? In other
Hashanah?
words, there's the key. If by Echad B'Tishrei you have a full 3 years, Abba Bar Mabel is saying, logically, then Echad B'Tishrei should exit the Arla, and if it blossomed from Echad B'Tishrei until Tu B'Shvat, it's not going to be Arla. When do we say that if it blossomed after Rosh Hashanah, before Tu B'Shvat, it's still considered the product of the 3rd year? That's only Peiros Netiya Zu. That's only because you don't have a full 3 years. You are saying, okay, if you want to use that, then you have to use the Tu B'Shvat. And we have to answer Yakir. Why Tu B'Shvat? We'll get in a moment. Even with Tu B'Shvat, you're not going to have a full years. Even with Tu B'Shvat, you're not having full 3 years, but you have to go until Tu B'Shvat. We'll see in a moment why. 1 second. So that's what Abba Mamabel was saying. Nidan hadvarim, nidam hadvarim. And Abzeda told him, I disagree with you. So Amalei, Abzeda tells Rabbi Bar Mamol, the im kening, that if it's so, that what? That the Bryce is only when you planted it 30 days before Rosh Hashanah. Then afilu netoy shloishim yom lifnei Rosh Hashanah yehi asur at shloishim yom lifnei Rosh Hashanah. He says, hold on. That's Rab Ze'eda's comeback. If you are teaching, if you are interpreting the pasuk in Kedoshim, 3 years means 3 years from when you planted it, then why b'chlal are you going to Echad B'Tishrei? If you're not looking at how halachically the years are counted, make up your mind. Either say miyoim liyoim, like your Yom Holedes. When is your birthday? Whenever you were born. When a person is born on what's today? Today is Yud Gimel on Yud Gimel Tishrei. So then Yud Beis Tishrei is the last day of the year, the end of the year. And when do you begin your next year on Yud Gimel Tishrei? Like Abba and Chana, their daughter, not them. So it's beautiful what he's saying. You don't do that because we know, go learn Masechtas Rosh Hashanah, that for almost all areas of Yiddishkeit, almost all, you don't go from Yom L'Yom. There's a certain date that the Torah says this date begins the new year. So if this date begins the new year, I don't care if it doesn't have 3 complete years. So either never use Tu B'Shvat or always use Tu B'Shvat. And really, why Tu B'Shvat? I mean, that's going to be the kasha. By the way, the Gemara's answer for why Tu B'Shvat goes according to everyone. So this is how he challenges. You can even argue. You have to know how to learn Gemara Yerushalmi properly. I don't think Rab Abba Bar Mamol is arguing with Rab Zeda because he didn't make a statement. All he said was Nidam Advarim, and Rab Zeda told him, "Ain't Nidam Advarim." No, I was the one that added because it says Peiros Netiya Zu. Because if that would have been what he would have said, then he's saying, the Bryce is saying the word Zu. I don't know what Rab Ze'eda does with the word Zu, but it's about the logic. And Rab Ze'eda tells him, I disagree with your logic. Now, so let's go back and now turn to Daf Yud Beis Amid Beis. And now the question is, my Kedoim, what's the yichus of Tu B'Shvat? And the Gemara gives a Gavaldika answer. And let me remind everyone that we learned in our pagination on Daf Vav Amid Beis, the Mishnah says the words, Ad Emosai Nikra'u Nitiyos. We had 3 opinions. That became 2 opinions. If you remember, Rabbi Loza ben Azariah says, Ache Yochoilu. Ache Yochoilu. Remember? And we learned the Gemara with the Rashi earlier. Ache Yochoilu means from when it's no longer Arla. Now I know, when is it no longer Arla? That is our topic. But let me say these words. The challenge with Tu B'Shvat, 1 second, I want to go to Yakir. The Mishnah says in Rosh Hashanah that Tu B'Shvat is Rosh Hashanah Li'ilonis. So why are we even asking why Tu B'Shvat? I'll tell you why we're asking. We're asking because once we established that in the beginning of the count, no one debates that. Echad B'Tishrei is when you begin, so why are we not consistent? So you have to remember, because there's an afkamina between an atiyah and an elon. As we're going to learn in the next Mishnah, there's a difference between a vegetable and a fruit. Chanata, lekita, by an atiyah, echad b'tishrei. By an elon, tu b'shvat. Now you have the Mishnah on Rosh Hashanah. Right? Echad b'shvat, or tu b'shvat is Rosh Hashanah li ilonois, not Rosh Hashanah li netiyos. And we learned before that when does the tree go from being an atiyah to an elon? There is a Tana that says it has to do with it has to do with Ache Yochaylu. It's once it's Tu B'Shvat, once it's Rosh Hashanah Li'ilonois, now it's an Elon. Now that it's an Elon, we go to a new count. Connected to that. Let's read it inside. Amar Rabbi Mana, Mikiv and Sho'aymin B'Tech Shel Elon. By an Elon, we know he doesn't even find it necessary to quote the Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah that Echad or Tu B'Shvat is Rosh Hashanah Li'ilonois. He's saying you're looking at an Elon now. At an Elon, what's the year of the Elon? Until Tu B'Shvat, you don't have Rosh Hashanah yet. Prior to Tu B'Shvat, you're still in the middle of the year. So wait, Mashlam Shanasai. I love it. And by the way, this, in my understanding, goes both to the suggestion or the opinion of Rabbi Bar Mamol, and it goes according to the Shita of Rabbi Zaid. I want you to know that in the Shulchan Aruch, he brings both opinions. That's why I think that when Rabbi Yosef learned the Machaber learned the Gemara, this Yerushalmi, he didn't see it that Rab Abba Bar Mamol backed off. It's a machloikas. And he brings Yesh Oimrim v'Yesh Oimrim. And because of that, we are machmer. We're speaking about an Isur Doiraisa and Eretz Yisrael. He brings both opinions. And the bottom line is, just to know the bottom line, because I was curious.
So we always go to Tu B'Shvat in the fourth year?
There you go, always. And let me add one thing, Danny. That's why I began with my words of introduction. We follow the concept of this brisa, but we do not paskin like this brisa. There are two steps that we paskin like. Like I said, number one, it only takes 2 weeks for Hashirash. But number two, even though Echad B'Tishrei is the New Year's for Netiyos, it's the New Year's, Echad B'Tishrei, for you to say that less than a full year, also Loishana, you have to have Shloshim Yom. So when you plant a tree, the Seder is, if you Tu B'Av, you planted a Tu B'Av, you have yourself 2 weeks, and you have yourself 30 days. Now Echad B'Tishrei is already year number 2. And then the next Echad B'Tishrei is year number 3. And therefore you would think that the next Echad B'Tishrei, it's year number 4. No, the next time, now you're graduating into an Elon, you have to wait until Tu B'Shvat. And we pass, no matter when you planted it, If I planted it any time after Echad B'Tishrei, which means if I planted it Tez, Zayin, Menachemov, I already planted it for this after Echad B'Tishrei. You have to wait until the next Echad B'Tishrei for you to enter into year number 2. The next, enter year number 3. That's year number 3. When do you exit 3? Tu B'Shvat.
So just, we haven't talked about this, but in terms of Net Revoy, that gets calculated
in Israel,
after...
Net Revoy is not b'chutz la'aretz. So it's very simple. We didn't talk about it yet.
Yeah, I know, but I'm just saying in terms of the timing, it would be everything post Tu B'Shvat.
Everything Tu B'Shvat. Very good.
Up to the end of the year?
Tu B'Shvat, beautiful. And the 4th year, why? Because now we're dealing with the fruits of an Elon. An Rosh Hashanah Elon is Tu B'Shvat.
So the 4 years is really like 4 years and 5 months.
That's right. Or it can be less, because even according to, we don't go like Rabbi Meir, that Yom Echad B'Shana Chashuv Shana, but Danny, don't minimize that Shloshim Yom Shana Chashuv Shana. Which means if I planted a if I planted a tree to Menachemov, then what are you talking about? Then the next Echad B'Tishrei, it's already year number 2. That means that even though you go at the end until Tu B'Shvat, you don't have 3 years. You have less than 3 years. Could be that way. You can have 2 years and let's say, and 45 days, plus 2 years and 45 days, plus Tishrei, Cheshvan, Kislev, Teves, Shvat, plus 5 months. So it's 6 months and a bit, 6.5 months or whatever. Okay, let's go back. Now, like we mentioned, guys, this was just, I want to chazer. Both concerning Maisvis. What we're learning now is not only concerning Shvis. If you want to know whether a product has the Kedusha of Peda Shvis, and if you want to know whether the Isur of Svichim that we mentioned is Shayach on something or not, so we have to separate the 3 categories: grains, olives, and grapes. Shlish. When did it reach 1/3 of its maturity? whenever that was, look at the year. The years that we're talking about goes from Echad B'Tishrei till Echad B'Tishrei. So if something was planted at the end of the 6th year, if you want to know, if it reached a shlish in the 6th year, mitzad echad, it's 6th, so you have to give ma'aser oni, not ma'aser sheni. Mitzad sheni, it doesn't have the kedusha of Pei Shvis, doesn't have the kedusha. When it comes to fruits, simcha, when did it bud? Most of the fruits bud Tu B'Shvat, but it doesn't matter. When did it bud? If you're living maybe in the south of the equator, maybe there's a whole different system over there. Whenever it budded, chanota. When it comes to vegetables, likita. So that's the rule. Now the Mishnah will give exceptions. So says the Mishnah, let's go. I know there's a machlekes. Rishonim, how you interpret it. We're going to follow Shitas Rashi as the Sfardim Paskan Halacha L'Maaseh that oiris is rice and doichen is millet. The Mishnah is going to mention over here 5 items: rice and millet. Piragim is a machlekes. Either it means poppy, whereas kevan, give me some good poppy seeds. What drug do they make out of it? I think it's heroin or dura.
Opium, I think.
Oh, I'm sorry, opium. Slicha, I stand correct. Opium or dura. Mistama dura. Dura makes up another drug, and bahashumshumim and sesame. I know they make drugs from sesame seed because when we used to go to jails to visit the prisoners, so then we were not allowed to bring challah with sesame seeds because they would test the people in there if they're taking drugs, and if they would eat sesame seeds, they would test positive. Anyways.
It's poppy seeds.
Okay, rice, millet, poppy, and sesame. Let's go with that. So here comes a chiddush. We'll see why it's... So you would say, this l'chayr should be in the category of vegetables, right? It's not a fruit. I know that by rice, right, the whole machlekes, what bracha do you make on it? So says the Mishnah, these items, it goes, mamish, the way we were speaking before about a tree, which is hashrasha. If it took root before Rosh Hashanah, however long it takes. Now don't forget the machlekes we had before in the previous Mishnah, right? 3 days, 2 weeks, 30 days was about a tree. Don't make an automatic link, I'm just saying it to myself, between how long does a tree need for it to take root versus these items, but it takes whatever it takes. So here it goes after it takes root. And if it took root taka before Rosh Hashanah, then misasrin l'sha'avad, both concerning the maisres. So if it's between the 4th and the 5th, means you picked it, you harvested the rice on the 5th year, or on the 4th year, But if it took root on the 3rd year, then after you give Meiser Sheni, after you give Meiser Rishon, you don't give Meiser Sheni, you give Meiser Oni. You picked it on the 4th year. The 4th year is Meiser Sheni. No, it goes after when it took root. Similarly, if you planted it at the end of the 6th and it's ready to be harvested on the 7th, you want to know what kedusha does it have? Is it 6th or 7th? Umatoram b'shvius. There's absolutely no kedusha of shvius in it. But the imlav, if it did not take root before Rosh Hashanah, then it's the next year's. So if asurim b'shvius, I don't know why the Mishnah is not consistent, right? The Rishon, Achlen is not over here. Right in the Reisha, it's first Meiser and then Shvius. Here it's first Shvius, Asurim b'Shvius, U'Mesasrin l'Shana Haba. Okay, now I want to say the following. This is going to be the main reason we will be quoting. Since rice, millet, let's go with poppy seeds and sesame seeds, do not grow at the same pace. Guys, remember this. They are exceptions, which means that if the year would be determined either after a 3rd growth, these are not fruits. So if it's not a 3rd growth, then you would go to, when you picked it, then a single crop would be divided into different tithing years, and we don't want for that to happen. Creates confusion. Since they do not grow at the same pace, even though they were planted at the same time, when they're planted at the same time, they take root at the same time. That happens at the same time. But then when they grow, they don't grow on the same pace. If you would follow either the rules of grains, olives and grapes, which is 3rd, or if you would follow the rules of other vegetables of when did you pick it, then the same crop would share 2 tithing years. That's crazy making. So the Chachamim says we're going to follow a consistency. Gavaldik. Now, no, whichever year it is. If you planted rice at the end of the 6th year, if it took root in the 6th year, whatever, then the 6th year. If it took root in the Shemitah year, then it has Kedusha Shvis, with many other rules that comes together with it. And now the Gemara is going to go to other potential exceptions where we have a machloikas. So by these 5, oides, doichen, peragim, and shumshumin, everyone agrees with what we said. But now, says the Tana Rab Shimon Shazuri, pul hamitzri, Egyptian bean, shezeroi lizera batchila. Guys, whoever learned Kalaim will appreciate this. So let me say it like this. There are certain products that both have seeds that can be used either to eat, many people eat seeds, or to plant. And that product also has green, a pod. Many people eat the greens. Certain products, if you want to know whether it's defined as a seed or as a green, it has to do with the kavanah of the person who planted it. Now, the Gemara will get more elaborate. What happens if you had one kavanah when you planted it and then you changed your mind? We'll learn about that later. But let's just make it simple. Certain things, is it a seed or is it a vegetable? What was the intent? If you intended to eat the seeds, has a din of a seed. If you intended to eat the greens, has a din of greens. So it says Reb Shimon Shazuri, Pulam Mitzri, that's the word, Shazoroi Lezera Batchila, that you lachatchila planted it for its seeds. Now, it doesn't have to mean that you planted it to eat the seeds. It can mean that you planted it to use the seeds to plant further. But if the primary purpose for what you planted it is not to eat the greens, I want to say what will be if the greens. Greens, what are greens, Simcha? Vegetables. What's vegetables? Basar Lakita. Means even the Pul HaMitzri for sure would follow the rule of vegetables, Lakita, if you planted it for the greens. The chiddush of Rab Shimon Shazuri is that since you planted it for the seeds, and let me just tell you like this, the greens are picked at the same time. That's the logic that I'm saying. This Pul HaMitzri, people that want to eat the greens, it will be harvested at the same time. So therefore, follow the rule of vegetables. It's not a tree. It's not a tree. You have to plant it every time to have a new product. It's not residual. But if you planted it for the seeds don't grow at the same pace. People who planted it for the seeds will not harvest it at the same time. So therefore, according to Rabbi Shimon Shazuri, the exception that Chazal gave for oides, doichen, etc., that it goes basar rasha, that would work because the Pul HaMitzris take root at the same time. That's the meaning of kayoytze bohen. I love it. Now, I want to make it clear, that's only Rab Shimon Shazuri, which means that the Chachamim hold that no matter for what you planted Pul HaMitzri, it has a din of a vegetable. Remember this. We can review it in the beginning of the next year. The next item, Rab Shimon Oimer, that's Stam Rab Shimon is Rab Shimon Bar Yochai. Afunim hagamloinim, large beans. Many people say it refers to chickpeas, but we're just going to use the words large beans. Also, kayoytze bahen, meaning Rab Shimon holds it depends on your initial intent for what you planted it for. If you planted these afunim hagamloinim to eat the greens of it, the leaves of it, since the leaves are all ready to be picked at the same time, and they are indeed harvested at the same time, so why should this be different? It's not a tree, it's a vegetable. Vegetable, how do you determine the year? When did you harvest it? Nekuda. But that's a good picture. But if you planted it primarily for its seed, not for its leaves, and again, the problem will be is that the seeds of these afunim hagamloinim do not mature, they not grow at the same pace. So here again, to make a consistency in determining the year 6th, 7th, or when it comes any year concerning the Meiser Sheni versus Meiser Ani, so he says, Kayoytze Bohen, it's Bashar Hashrasha, Rabbi Lazar Oimer. Now Rabbi Lazar, the Tanakama holds, no, it's always a vegetable. Rabbi Lazar is qualifying Rab Shimon's opinion. That's important. Rab Shimon is speaking about a case where you planted it for its seed. So on that says Rabbi Lazar that even when you planted it for its seed, When does it? When are you going to say that it goes after Hashrasha? That's only if the pods of the seeds grew before Rosh Hashanah. But if the pods themselves did not grow before Rosh Hashanah, you can't consider it of the previous year. There's seeds, there's pods, and then there's greens.
The seeds did form before Rosh Hashanah.
Not the seeds forms, it took root before Rosh Hashanah. The seeds do not form at the same time. So when can you say that you go Bashar Ashrasha, which will be advantageous, that this guy that will harvest it when the seeds are ready, he'll harvest it at different times. So you want to know, it was all took Ashrasha. Rabbi Lazar adds this new nuance, that even the Afunim Hagamloinim, that again, Rabbi Lazar is speaking Bishitas Rab Shimon, that according to Rab Shimon, if you planted it for its seed, then it receives the classification of the year in which it took root, which would be before Rosh Hashanah. When can you say that? If at least shetir milu lifnei Rosh Hashanah, it's at least if the pods were formed before Rosh Hashanah. But if the pods did not form after Rosh Hashanah, then you're going to have to go basad likita, even though it means, well, actually, we're speaking about on that area. The likita will be after Rosh Hashanah. If it was so underdeveloped before Rosh Hashanah, it will all be picked, not at the same time, but it's all going to be picked after Rosh Hashanah. So at least you're not going to have two separate crops. Seeds are ready to be picked at some time, the greens at another time.
Yeah, the seeds are ready to be picked before Rosh Hashanah. And the pods are
No one will pick the seeds. No one picks it without the pods. Without the pods, the seeds will never be ready. Grows on the pod. If you don't even have the pod, it's too little of it. The hashrasha can take place before Rosh Hashanah. Gavaldik. Okay, Chavra, we're really getting into it. We're stopping over here. God willing to be continued.